Hi, everybody. This is Talking Digital Industries, the podcast for technologies and trends that drive industrial enterprises. And I'm your host, Chris Brow. Flying. Now, I think this is not just a big mystery, but also a big dream of basically everybody out there. Who hasn't dreamt of flying? You know what I mean? Like just taking off, just, a run up and just spreading one's wings and flying through the air, basically. Now, with today's increasing mobility of society and the impact on the environment, the focus is on CO2 emissions. And of course, the civil aerospace industry has been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. I guess we have plenty to discuss in today's episode on the aerospace industry. And I'm more than excited to introduce my guests in just a couple of moments. The questions we'll be talking about are: how can decision makers handle the situation? What are the most pressing challenges in the industry? And if, again, digitalization is key to survive and thrive, what does this mean for aerospace? So I'll be discussing these topics and more with my guests. First up, we have the managing director at AeroDynamic Advisory and a very knowledgeable analyst and consultant for the aerospace industry. He's also been on numerous podcasts, but also on news and radio programs, including BBC, Reuters, CBS, CNN, PBS, you name it. And now, finally, on our Talking Digital Industries podcast, I'm more than happy to have him with us, Richard Aboulafia. Richard, great to have you with us. How are you doing today?
Oh, just great, Chris. Great to be on. Really appreciate you and Siemens having me on the podcast, and looking forward to talking about taking off.
All right. Sounds good. And also joining us from Siemens Digital Industries is the Vice President of Aerospace. Let's welcome Jürgen Nolde. Jürgen, can you hear me?
Hello, Chris and Richard. Yes, fine, and glad to be here.
Great. Great to have you both on the show. I got to tell you, I'm very into aerospace myself, especially when I was a child. I became a member of the Young Astronauts Club at school. In the afternoon, we'd get together once a week, and you kind of like had the dream of becoming an astronaut. I don't know. I was like 9 or 10 at the time, I think, or maybe 11. I didn't become an astronaut, obviously. Nevertheless, the technology fascinates me. Now, my question is, what about you guys? I mean, when did you first come into contact with planes, with flying and all that stuff? And when did you realize that this was the business you wanted to be in? Would you even go so far to describe yourself as an aerospace fanatic, maybe? Richard, how about you? Why don't you start it off?
Well, I think all of us as children are fascinated by transportation, things that move, mechanical objects, and of course, aircraft are as great as it gets because they also fly. And I was certainly bitten with that bug and was building model airplanes at a young age, and it never went away, I'm delighted to say. I consider myself one of the luckiest people you'll meet because I get to work in this amazing field with amazing people and amazing things that fly. So I would definitely characterize myself as a geek. I have a very large library of aerospace books, and if I get to read half of them in my lifetime, I'll consider myself hugely privileged. My son and I occasionally build a model kit. So getting back to those roots too.
Cool. Sounds good. How about you, Jürgen?
Well, really, I also started building aeroplanes when I was 6 or 7. And I had my whole room full of plastic aircraft until I got in trouble with my parents. Then I really decided I wanted to become a pilot. I need to fly aircraft. Mm-hmm. And probably because from building all those airplanes, I developed a short-sightedness. And in the end, this kept me from becoming a pilot. So I started to study engineering. And I'm at Siemens for some years now, was in engineering in the automotive industry. And now the function is to build up an account management for the major aircraft manufacturers. So in a way, I realized what I always wanted to do from when I was a kid.
Sounds good. So you both found your dream job, so to say, in a way.
Yes.
I could not be happier.
Now, when we speak of the aerospace industry, I mean, I think most of us think of, commercial planes flying us to our holiday destination, airplanes powered with kerosene. But, that's just one section of a much broader market. There are cargo planes, helicopters, and the upcoming industry of air taxis. And there's a lot of discussion on aircraft propulsion, electric or hydrogen. And I wonder, where is all this heading to? I mean, what kind of flying objects are we likely to see in the near future? Any favorites, Richard?
Well, I think you look at the world of possible propulsion changes, and the one thing that's kind of lost is that we've been better than any other industry at self-disciplining. You look at the 70 years of jet travel, and every year we've gotten 1 or 2% better in terms of fuel efficiency and emissions reductions. Today's jets, sure enough, are over 70% more efficient and less polluting than the jet age forebears in the late 1950s. Now, having said that, we definitely need to move towards some kind of change. It's going to take a long time before batteries can be scaled up to allow electrification. Maybe one day it'll happen. Maybe it'll take the form of fuel cells. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fascinating experimentation, but I'm afraid it is a long road. And in the meantime, conventional engines in new and more radical forms, like, for example, ultra-high bypass engines or prop fans, a return to propellers. There are so many ways to achieve greater propulsive efficiency and less pollution using turbine technology. So I think we've got another couple decades ahead of that. But in the meantime, there's going to be some really interesting aircraft built with electrics, just as, if only in niche production, that prepare us for the day that we follow the rest of the world economy and move towards electrification in one way or another.
Thank you, Richard, so far. Let me come to you, Jürgen. And just to make it clear, Siemens is not an aircraft manufacturer, of course. Nonetheless, it would be interesting to hear what Siemens' stake is here when it comes to supporting the industry. Like, what are some of the most exciting offerings of Siemens to the aerospace industry? Jürgen?
Well, you're absolutely right, Chris. Siemens is not an aircraft producer, but we support the aircraft manufacturers and their global supply chain in their strive to produce and engineer innovative aircraft. So we start with the engineering of an aircraft, and then we provide all the software tools to design the aircraft, to have it as a kind of digital twin, and to then even simulate the behavior before it exists as a prototype. And after that, based on this digital twin that we have, we provide the software and engineering capabilities to plan the production and to automate the manufacturing process. And finally, when the aircraft is being produced and flying, we then have all this data to optimize production and to support the aircraft manufacturers when they, for instance, do an update or further develop the aircraft.
Now, that's a pretty big spectrum, I'd say. I mean, which technology is closest to your heart, though, Jürgen? The one where you see the biggest demand, or maybe the biggest opportunities for your customers?
Well, I studied mechanical engineering, and back then, many decades ago, we learned to program with punch cards. So I'm not so deep into software, and that's why my personal opportunity and demand is in aircraft manufacturing, in smelling that oil, in seeing how these extremely complex parts are manufactured, a part costing, for instance, €250,000, and to see the capabilities of today's automation and digitalization to produce these parts with highest accuracy. And the aerospace industry is quite different from automotive, for instance, because we have very few products that are being produced, and they are very complex. So that's some of the main challenge of today. And really, like Richard mentioned, the industry is really finding itself going more sustainable and requires desperately this increased sustainability through lighter material, more efficient coordination of the incredible supply chain all over the world, which has reduced capacity and now is rapidly ramping up production. And Siemens has, in the end, developed these concepts that move end to end, from design up to production and backwards, so that we really try to make life a little bit easier for the aircraft manufacturers.
Since we're talking about increased sustainability all the time, I'd like to come back to Richard real quick to ask you, is it a contradiction to talk about increasing sustainability and the increased speed and comfort that many customers also might seek? What is your take on that? Do you see any trends?
Well, to a certain extent, it's a great question. I'm afraid to a certain extent, it just might be, like, for example, I mentioned prop fans before, which I think is a fairly exciting relatively new propulsion technology. It's been around before, but it's coming back with new materials, new capabilities. inherently it is a little slower. Your typical jet transport customer travels at about Mach 8.3, Mach 8.4. These take you back a little bit to around Mach 7.9, Mach 8. So slightly slower, but they achieve double-digit levels of propulsive efficiency. But, most of the time you don't have to sacrifice efficiency or speed, or I should say speed and comfort, in order to get greater efficiency and less pollution. For example, all the technologies Jürgen just mentioned, we're so focused on the propulsion angle, but so much happens behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Digitization to make factories more efficient, more ecologically friendly ways of, tearing an aircraft down at the end of its life cycle. There are so many ways to improve how an aircraft is built, how it goes through its life, and how it gets disposed of. And I don't think we tell that story as effectively as we should because, of course, eco-friendliness is a much bigger picture than just flying through the air. Right. So you look at all of those technologies like digitization and whatever else, there's absolutely no compromise involved. It's a net benefit to the industry with no trade-offs whatsoever.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Talking about a story that isn't told often enough, I come to think about the whole manufacturing process of such a big object, like a commercial plane or a civil airplane, Jürgen, especially for those of us who are not from the aerospace industry. How can you help us understand the manufacturing process a bit better? I mean, I know it takes quite some time to produce such a huge plane, and maybe you can tell us, how do your customers actually produce all those parts and make them fit together at the right time in one production line?
Yeah, Chris, that's really the largest challenge of the industry because there are, of course, large and extremely complex parts being produced by many manufacturers. And then these parts are manufactured, for instance, in machine tools and robots. And then the challenge is not to make mistakes because these parts are so expensive and to get the part right the first time. And this is one of the keys for utilizing digitalization. Because if you produce 1 million cars, that's quite easy because you have a standardization. But when a manufacturer manufactures hundreds of aircraft a year, everyone is a little bit different. And then the challenge is to bring all these parts together, to assemble them in one or several lines. And here, programmable logic controllers coordinate all processes. And for instance, a manufacturing execution system that's based on the one software data backbone in the whole company coordinates the management of these orders as well as product quality. But really, time is too short to go into a lot of detail on how manufacturing works, and the description is quite vague. So, we have developed this virtual aerospace world, this virtual world of aerospace manufacturing, where we show in pretty big detail the technologies required to manufacture aircraft and what Siemens is able to provide to make aircraft manufacturing more sustainable and easier.
Sounds impressive. And, on your next trip to one of those halls, be sure to take me with you, Jürgen, okay? We got to find a date. Now, the aerospace industry is obviously always under a lot of pressure. Not only does it have to improve its efficiency and manage complexity, but society is challenging the industry to be more sustainable and innovative. And some of us even ask for the cheapest airplane tickets. Now, this is no joke. Just a few days ago, a friend of mine who actually works in London and flies back and forth between Frankfurt and London very frequently, he bought tickets for under 10 euros. This is no joke. Now, Richard, what has already been accomplished, let's say, in the last 10 years, and how can companies master this balancing act?
Well, it's difficult because, of course, one of the fastest growth segments in aviation has been the so-called ultra low-cost carriers that thrive with, extremely low fares. Now, they make some of that back in the form of add-on taxes and, of course, ancillary fees. If you want a cup of coffee, it's 4 euros or something.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I can't help but wonder how the external costs of the environment are going to be passed on to the customer. And if it is carbon taxes, obviously that's going to complicate this equation. Having said that, you look at these very low tickets and the people who are flying on them, would it really be that big a deal if they went from, say, 10 euros to 15 euros and, help the environment that way? Would that really impact their decision to go to, I don't know, a bachelor party to Bratislava or something like that? I'm not really sure that it would. So I think there is some latitude in the system to pass on additional costs. But of course, this too just creates this tremendous pressure on suppliers to keep costs down. And we've been really good at that. It's not just the increasing efficiency and eco-friendliness of modern jets relative to where we were. It's also that costs have been consistently reduced in real terms. The actual price, for example, of an A320 or a 737 is in nominal terms, that is to say, just sticker price, about the same as it was 20 years ago, which means we've been, in terms of inflation, losing a couple % per year. That's because we've been better and better at economically and efficiently building jets. A lot of that is for the increasing level of factory automation and digitization that Jürgen talks about. So much of it depends upon, frankly, just reducing keystrokes in the manufacturing process.
Right. Would you say metal 3D printing has contributed to this process also?
3D printing, of course, is relatively new for everybody. And there are places where it makes a great deal of sense and places where maybe not so much. And it's sort of been a little bit forward, a little bit back here and there. I think it's going to start having a very big impact when we figure out how to more efficiently design components that benefit from additive manufacturing, 3D printing. Because right now, of course, we're just replacing bits and pieces that have already been designed. But when we learn how to more efficiently design components that benefit from this, that's where you'll really see nice savings in terms of weight and fuel.
So a lot of potential to look forward to there, I guess.
Absolutely.
Now, everybody's talking about the potential of electric airplanes also. And coming back to our huge haul and the complex production process you talked about earlier, Jürgen, how do electric engines change the production process? I know that for the automotive industry, it changes almost everything. Is it the same in the aerospace sector?
I think in the long run, it will be the same, but we have to look at the timeline for aerospace. And surely this is much longer than in the automotive industry. So, Chris, we expect that we will see the first smaller passenger planes around 2025, maybe up to 2030. And currently, the plan is that a single aisle jet will take until 2035, until it's on the market, and it's flying purely electric. So the aircraft manufacturers are working on these concepts today. They're taking a lot of time because, like you say, the shape of the aircraft will also change dramatically because of the kerosene tanks not being required anymore because of a new setup. And that's why these developments are taking a long time, but it will also take some time to implement electric engines. And also hydrogen fuel is one of the technologies that we can expect to be in the aircraft market soon. So also we have to consider that introducing hydrogen into flying will also change the complete infrastructure at the airports. And therefore, we will see this major change, but it will take a long time, even though it will be quite similar to automotive and change our world of flying in the long run.
What's your opinion, Richard, the future of aerospace? Will it be electric? Now, I assume you're going to say it depends.
Well, I think in the long run, we're hopefully the entire economy will be electric in one way or another. I think we're probably going to be the last sector of the economy to electrify because of the battery densification and, of course, safety qualification issues associated with electricity. As a kind of step towards there, one thing we're looking at, of course, is hybrid, which is where you have just one turbine that powers motors and recharges batteries and whatever else via the architecture of the plane, and that requires new challenges in terms of thermal management and power connectivity and everything like that. That might be a step there, and more and more of the plane will be powered by electricity. That is to say, rather than hydraulic or pneumatic power that's transferred from the engines. So, it's going to be a slow road there, but there'll be many steps on the way.
All right. Now, looking at the time, we almost have to wrap up again. That's how it is, Time flies. That's fitting. Time flies when you're having fun. Last but not least, I guess we do have to talk about the pandemic a bit and how it influences our travel activities and the aerospace industry, obviously. And companies are cutting travel costs. Many people are avoiding long distance flights. Speaking of my own experience, I, for instance, reduced flying by almost 80%, I'd say, maybe even 90. Richard, what's your outlook? Will the industry return to pre-pandemic levels, or are many of these changes for the long term?
Well, there's two aspects of this. One, of course, is just getting over the pandemic itself. And that's going to take a little while. We're not expecting people to get back in the air to the peak in 2019 until probably the second half of 2023. Now, that's not the same, of course, as, the big decision of whether or not to travel. In terms of human experience, I think younger people these days are, frankly, if anything, more enamored with experience than with possessions. So I'm not expecting any issues in coming back on the tourism front. On the business front, a lot of businesses say we're going to travel less, and that'll save us money, and it's a nice message for people. But in reality, they find that when the world opens up again and their competitors come back and they don't, they can lose market share. Right. So whatever they say now, I'm not so sure I would take all that seriously. There is the question of whether intra-company, travel between business units comes back to the same extent. That's going to be interesting to watch. On the other hand, all the technology we're using now, Zoom, WebEx, Teams, whatever, we've had that for years. And nobody has used that as a substitute for business travel. So I tend to be pretty optimistic on the idea of a recovery. Okay.
So have you booked your next flight?
In theory, at least. My family and I are going to Venice for Carnivale in February.
Oh, look at that. That sounds good. How about you, Jürgen?
Well, of course, we are looking towards business trips to meet our customers again, which, of course, did not take place in the past years. But Chris, all Germans go to Mallorca. So really, my next flight is booked to Mallorca, where we try to find some sun after this long winter. However, just as Richard explained, aerospace is here to come back, and we are looking forward to this development that will take place in the future.
Well, I hope to talk to both of you again about this topic in the future. I'd like to thank you both for taking me on this flight through this very interesting topic. I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did. And I hope our listeners out there did also. I think this was a very exciting conversation about an exciting industry. And if we caught your interest, do turn to www.siemens.com/aerospace, where you can book your tour through the virtual showroom Aero World. Jürgen talked about it earlier in this episode. Please stay tuned for our next episode. And once again, this is Talking Digital Industries. It's been a pleasure to have you, and stay safe, everybody. Hope to hear you again next time. Goodbye.